Hi everyone and welcome to Back in Time Fiction, the channel dedicated to historical fiction and historical fantasy. Today I have the pleasure of welcoming R.W.Peake, Ron Peake, the writer of the breathtaking Marching with Caesar series. Together we will discuss his books, obviously his own story starting from his time in the Marines, but also self-publishing, and he will give some advice to new writers out there, so stick around. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and enjoy. So thank you very much for joining me today, Ron. I'm very happy we are talking face to face or kind of online because we've chatted a bit over the last 2 or 3 years, maybe 2 years, I believe. And you've been a very big help for my career as a writer, not only with your books, which have been amazing and inspiration to me, as I mentioned in After Notes, I believe. But also as a self-published writer, you've given me a lot of very cool tips. So thank you very much. And I hope a lot of people I hope a lot of people will watch this video and get to your books. We'll talk about your books in a minute, actually, but first I wanted to ask you a few questions about yourself, starting with something pretty obvious from your writing. You have experience of the soldier's life. You've been in the Marines. So can you tell me or tell us how it helped you, how this experience in the Marines helped you become the writer you are today?
Yeah, when I got that question, I thought about it a lot. I think one of the things that, first off, I have always been a voracious reader. Actually, the irony is I don't read nearly as much as I used to, when I was a kid. I was always fascinated with history and always fascinated with the military, and that's the story that I learned about my family, my father's family, and all. More than anything, and that's a theme that is in Marching with Caesar as well, and that's the power of blood. And that's because not to knock my mom's side of the family, I am the only member of my family born in the South. Everybody else, my mom was born in Illinois. My maternal grandparents came from Wisconsin and Illinois or Michigan. And exclusively every member of my generation, my age and all on my mom's side of the family was born, up north. And because I didn't know my dad's family, the only exposure I had was to my mom's family, and I never felt like I fit in. And my mom is or was a professional symphony musician. My grandparents, my maternal grandfather founded the Houston Youth Symphony and Ballet that has gone on. Some of the more famous alumni are Patrick Swayze and Tommy Tune, the Broadway dancer, and countless. We don't even know how many professional symphony musicians there are around the world. He was in Life magazine in the 50s and all. And my grandmother was a music teacher and was also a professional musician. She played in the Houston Symphony before my mom did. My mom played in the Houston Symphony for 43 years. But, I had some musical talent, but it was never a big interest. I was always interested in things like the military. And when I read books about history and all, it was always about war and all. And as I read, what I realized is there's a timeless quality to the life of the grunt that, it's a world where things are down to their most elemental. And what I learned about why I was drawn to all of this is that, as I learned, my dad, he was injured or wounded in a place called French Indochina. That gives you an idea. Before it was called Vietnam in 1959, and he was brought back to the States, and then he died of an infection from the wounds he received. I don't know the details other than that, but anyway, he was in the military. Every member of the male side or my father's side of the family had served in the military at one point. My great grandfather actually fought for the South. He was a prisoner of war, and he was drafted into the Confederacy. And I didn't know any of this until I was almost 20 years old, or around 20 years old. And when I met my father's sister, my Aunt Jackie, for the first time in 1980, it was a profound moment, because all of a sudden I felt like I belonged. And so that's something that is also part of this, and that is that not only the power of blood, but getting back to the original idea that when you're a grunt, things are pretty simple. You've got people you may or may not respect telling you what to do. You're doing really crappy stuff in really crappy places. Generally speaking, if you are a part of an invading army, they're not happy to see you. And you are also there's a reason that the infantry, I'm sure the reason it's called the infantry is because it's a young man's game. Infants being, and so look, young men, no matter of the age, are obsessed with a couple of things, women being at the top of the list. Things like sports, whether it be chariot races or whatever the sport of the day is, whether it's college football or whatever, all of these different things, they have never really changed. What you're talking about doesn't change. It's just the particulars of it that change over the years. And especially in terms of the period of ancient Rome that I'm writing about, they were way more involved in the political world than we are. Well, up until fairly recently, we are today. And I can see why. I mean, because when people are getting stabbed on the floor of the Senate, it's probably pretty titillating for the members of the lower class to talk about that kind of stuff. That it is a kind of a occupational hazard to be a politician in ancient Rome was getting your head cut off or your hands nailed to the Senate. Well,
it's probably had some very quick ramification for the regular people when a member of the Senate was being killed. The rest of the city was going to go up in flames. So you probably took an interest in it.
Yeah. And so as a result, that's the kind of thing. And Romans in particular were very political. They were very, very proud of their republic, and even for their time, I should say for their time, there's a lot of debate about their literacy rate. But one of the other things that I discovered, not only in the military, but before I joined the military, I didn't join until I was 23. And I worked as a construction worker before that, what we call hanging iron, the tall skyscrapers. I used to ride the beams up and connect them, and working, working on big, tall buildings in Houston, especially during that period in the late 70s, early 80s, when it was a really booming economy, and, they were putting up buildings everywhere. And what I learned is, just because you're uneducated doesn't mean you're dumb. And I think there's a lot of that our modern ideals get applied to that today and back then, where people looked at guys in the military, the only reason they're in the military is because they can't do anything else, kind of thing. And I certainly think that I will say today it's not nearly as popular to say that as it used to be. When I was starting in the 80s and the 90s, and it was still enough of a post-Vietnam hangover before Desert Storm and before the War on Terror, before 9/11. It was socially acceptable to tell people in the military, well, the only reason you're doing this is because your only other option is to be slinging burgers, kind of thing. And realizing that, and what early on, what I realized with people like that is they themselves had never been in the military, and so they're speaking from a position where they don't really know. And it's the same thing going back 2,000 years, is that just because these guys may not have known how to read and write didn't mean that they were stupid, you know. But your life is boiled down to some really simple stuff. And, you know, that was the genesis of actually the whole series. Was I was listening to Caesar's commentaries about the conquest of Gaul. I was driving to my really crappy job that I hated. And Houston being as large as it is, you're talking, I was lucky. I only had a 90-minute round trip commute. You know, that's pretty good in Houston. And so I would listen to books on tape or audiobooks now. And I was listening to, you know, nerd that I am, I was listening to Caesar's commentaries. And I all of a sudden started wondering, what was it like for the grunts, the guys like me? My primary MOS in the Marine Corps is 0311, which is Marine Rifleman. And my secondary is 8541, which is a Scout Snipers. But you do a lot of digging. You do a lot of what we call chicken shit work. You know, a lot of make busy work and all that. And so you read about these guys digging, for example, during the campaign, the first year of the first campaign against the Helvetii, and they're digging an 18-mile ditch and wall that is 15 feet wide and 12 feet deep. And I just started thinking, what was it like for those guys? And so I back then I was always on the lookout for things to read, and I started looking around for things, and I did see the Marius's Mules had just come out, and then James Mace's series, but it was more on
the big guys,
the Varus, you know, and it was in everything. And Colleen McCullough's series, which I consider masterful and a really great, a really good, that's what I think historical fiction should be kind of book. And I looked around, and then there was the Macro Cato series by Simon Scarrow, which became one of my favorites. But other than that, there wasn't anything that talked about a guy who basically shows up at the recruiter's office. You know, I was on recruiting duty, and these guys would walk in and say, I want to join the Marines. And so there was no stories about somebody who started at that level and then, you know, went from there. And so that's kind of the genesis of it. And so in 2008, I started to sit down and write, and spent God knows how much money on out of print books. There was a real, there was a true, thanks to Napoleon and Napoleon II, who thought he was the incarnation of Julius Caesar, there was a real revival of scholarship in the 19th century. And of course, was it Stoffel, his colonel that Napoleon II sent all around France, and using just the commentaries, basically dug up all of the various sites, using just the commentaries as the guide, and found most of them, you know, which is a pretty remarkable event about the authenticity of at least the locations. Now, did Julius Caesar kill 2 million people?
Enslaved 1 million and everything?
I mean, that's all, you know, that's
a bit of a propaganda.
Just a little bit.
It's funny that you mentioned the locations of that have been found in France. That's Napoleon III, by the way. I know he's the second, but he's called the third. Right, but because I'm the book I'm writing right now, so I'm working on a new series which is set in just before the conquest of Gaul, but in Gaul before the conquest by Julius Caesar. Okay. Because the place where I grew up, there is it supposedly is the place where one of the biggest battle of the conquest of Gaul happened between Sabinius and the Confederation of Armoricans, you would call, I guess.
Yeah.
And I grew up like 5 kilometers from this place, from the place that is supposedly the place of the battle.
Right.
So, and I set my new book on this idea for later on in the series. So I'm deep into this kind of research right now. So I'm happy you mentioned it. But yeah, there was a big revival of all this time period in the late 19th century.
I'm going to take a guess here. Do you read or write German?
No, I don't. I don't read German
because a lot of the 19th century stuff is in German. Rice Holmes, T. Rice Holmes, I think it was, that who, that's the guy that, I mean, the book itself, The Conquest of Gaul, is, the actual book is something like 200 pages. And then the bibliography and the appendixes are another 600 and some odd pages.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a fascinating thing. And I really used it. And that's in the books, I use those since they were out of print and I could do that without getting sued by his estate. The maps that are in that book are the ones I used. But yeah, I mean, but it was frustrating for me not understanding or reading German or anything like that, seeing this wealth of, information that, 150 years is not that much closer to the original event, but at the same time, it's better than what we have, and so, but yeah, I mean, that's actually fascinating, that idea of, looking at things from another perspective. I had a friendship with a guy who wrote a book called The Day Gaul Died. And this was very early when I had first, started, and he reached out to me, and it was basically the same premise. He was writing his story from the perspective of a Gallic warrior who was fighting against Julius Caesar. And, he published his first book, and it was good. He was also, I think he probably is dead by now, but because he was pretty old. He was in his mid to late 70s when he wrote that. But just the very concept, of being able to do that, I think is a fascinating one. And those are the kinds of things that I look for. When it comes to like real history, what really turned me on, I was the weird kid at 12 years old who was reading Clausewitz and Jomini and all. But what I remember is reading Cornelius Ryan's The Longest Day. And what fascinated me was not the story of the generals, but the story of the guys who jumped out of the airplanes or got off the landing craft and all that. And that's has been and will continue to be where my my focus is the guys who are doing the actual things that are making these people famous. So, and anyway, so that's yeah, go ahead.
No, and I was going to say, this is something for people who haven't read your books yet and definitely should. It's very easy to feel is this, while the story is obviously in the Roman times, this could happen very easily in our times, because like you said, the grunt, sorry for using this term, the grunt is the grunt, right? So the feelings are probably the same. The backstories are very similar as well. And I really feel like that's why especially your book one got me into it right away, is because of this, how easy it is to get immersed into this story of a regular-ish guy who gets into the army. And
now, Titus is regular-ish. And that was the other part of it was, okay, trying to think of, because I decided early on I wanted, because I knew these people exist, or I knew these men existed, and that was, not everybody who joined a Delectus died. They survived, and we do have through epitaphs or funeral monuments and so on, we know that there are men who died, very wealthy men who started out in the ranks, and especially during that period where no, Caesar probably didn't enslave 1 million people, but he did enslave a lot of them. And these guys got a percentage of that. And, then what they stole for themselves and so on. And so, yeah, that's, that was always, I wanted to talk about a guy who had achieved everything,
all of this,
who was looking back. And especially because of the period of time. I mean, you start with the conquest of Gaul, and then in a 42-year period, you have the conquest of Gaul, you have the First Civil War, you have the Second Civil War, the beginning of the empire and the Augustan reforms. And I don't think that there is a period of Roman history where that much change occurred and that much fighting occurred in particular in that, in one man's lifetime.
Especially battles of that size because after that they decided to reduce the number of legions and which might not have been a terrible idea at the time. So the battles don't have like 10 legions facing 10 legions anymore. That was really a short time.
The only entity on the face of the earth at that time that could have, at Philippi, was it something like close to 60 legions. Now, the quality of the legions is something, but when you got both armies, there was no other power on earth that could have outfitted and equipped that many men. Even, they're killing each other, but the point is just they're all Romans, or basically affiliated with Rome in some way. The Parthian Empire, they couldn't have done it. They didn't have a near enough a centralized system to equip and outfit and all that. That was actually their strength. It was their decentralization and their mobility. But at the same time, if they had gotten into a civil war situation, you go back, there was no other time where that many men were in one place at one time trying to kill each other, and only Rome could have done it.
Imagine if they hadn't faced each other, but actually used that focus somewhere else. That's actually what we found in your series. So if I'm correct, you wrote all your books in the same series, Marching with Caesar, which includes the main line story, I don't know how to call it, of Titus Pullus and his descendants. And then you wrote a few what ifs, starting with the idea of Julius Caesar not dying like he did, but surviving, not dying at the Ides of March, and going on with his conquest of Parthia, and then some other things.
And then he just keeps going.
And it just keeps going.
Ironically, the whole Caesar Ascendant / Caesar Triumphant series, and I know, there are people who either most of the commentary I get on it, it's an either or thing. People either like it or they really hate it. And that's fine. But it was actually, when I first started off and I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and, looking at how I was going to, make this into a career, I was writing a blog. And there used to be I think there still may be on, but a series, I think it's called Top Warrior. And it's a series where it takes like a Gurkha fighting a Spartan hoplite, and what would happen. And it's created, and all of the input is created by Slytherin, which is the video game system they create a lot of, kind of popular military type games that are, I'm not a fan of them, but they are very popular. But and they had one that was like a Roman centurion versus a Japanese samurai. Well, but see, the thing is, it's just one-on-one. And so I began thinking, now, what would happen if the legions of Rome faced the samurai of Japan? who would win. And that was the fodder for this blog I was writing. And I would write these little chunks. And it began with the supposition being, Caesar survives the Ides of March. So, but I actually wrote that part, what became Caesar Triumphant Part 1 and Part 2 now. I wrote that first. And the reason I wrote it first is because I kept getting these comments on the blog going, this should be a book. This should be a book. And I was dumb enough to go, oh, okay. And so I just basically was very vague about, it's set 10 years after the Ides of March. And Caesar, he started to invade, he did his invasion of Parthia, but then he kind of wanted to outdo Alexander the Great. And in that sense, I can argue that. I can argue Caesar, because we do know he was going to go to Parthia. I mean, according to Plutarch, he was supposed to leave the next day. And I can also make the argument, given the story, also, I think in Plutarch, or maybe this was Suetonius, of how he was the praetor when he was 32 years old in Spain.
In Spain with the statue.
And the statue, and weeping at the foot of Alexander the Great statue, going, when he was 32, he conquered the world, and look at me, kind of thing. So I can say, okay, look, you get into Parthia, and if you've managed to conquer Parthia,
you're just next door to India.
Yeah, is it really that, so it was all very vague. And, I'm here, I've got them at the Isle of Wight. And it was also a way, selfishly, to keep the original Titus Pullus alive. It was a very difficult thing for me to say goodbye to him.
Oh, but the whole crew was terrible to say goodbye to.
Yeah.
Not
Titus
all of them at the same time. But
it was. And so this way, it was a way to keep them all together, keep the band together. Do something that was fun. Well, then it came out, and it was none of those books have been nearly as successful as the Marching with Cigarettes series. It's just not. But people go, well, wait a minute. Well, what happened in Parthia? I want to know what happened in Parthia, and how did he get there? And so that ended up. It's now 7 books. And then I finally finished early last year, I think, where it is the complete story of a Caesar who, goes on to conquer the known world. Not really conquer, because he's got he didn't conquer the Han dynasty. He's got a kind of a wary, alliance with them or whatever. And now I've gotten a few emails from people going, so what are you going to do about, because Titus Pullus has a descendant he leaves behind in India, who is the prototype Titus character, huge, surly attitude, bad temper, kind of guy. And I've been tempted,
I knew this was coming.
Fast forwarding a couple centuries, and but that's so far down the road. But so there's that. That's the alternate history series.
And then and then the 10th. Recently you 2 books out, right, for the 10th?
Yes,
if I'm up to date.
And as of this point, there's only going to be these 2 books, and it's mainly an issue of bandwidth.
Okay.
I just one of the it's a really good problem to have, but it is a problem, and it's a problem that I created, and I created it because I think, as we talked before, I told you how I actually wrote what became the first 7 volumes in more or less one sitting. I mean, from 2008 to 2010, that's all I finished the conquest of Gaul part in late 2008, early 2009. And I have this feeling of as a storyteller, and the way I look at things is that there are 2 types of successful authors, or actually there's 3. There are authors who are good writers. There are authors who are good storytellers. And then there are a few who are both. I I personally put Stephen King in that both category. Tom Clancy, I wouldn't consider a good author, but he was a good storyteller. Okay. So, and for me, I wanted the story, and it's something that I didn't know. I guess it was just a logical assumption to make. I do struggle now where now that I have a couple of others, I have the Titus Chronicles, and I'm bouncing back and forth. I have to catch up. All right. So, I finished with Sacrevere's Revolt. I'm in the last stages before I sent it to Beth, my editor. I've got to figure out, all right, what am I going to do next? And the problem is that because I released a book that became a bestseller every 90 days, I had the first 2.5 years from 2012 through 2014, I had that locked. I didn't have to write a word. But the thing is that then people started getting used to the idea that I'm releasing a 200,000 word book every 90 days. And it is literally, and again, it is a great problem to have. I don't want to sound like I'm whining. I will release a book, and within a week, I get asked, so when's the next one coming? And now that I have the Titus Chronicles, which is slowly is picked up, it's actually doing a lot better now than when I first started. I knew there was going to be a transition and all, because people just, people who are ancient Rome fans aren't necessarily Anglo-Saxon Viking fans, and that was one of the reasons I did it. But anyway, what I realized is that, especially with the things that are going on in my personal life, I've got to lighten the load somewhat. And so instead of 4 books a year, I'm going to have to shoot for between two good quality books, or at most 3. And the 10th is just one that I don't really have the bandwidth, mainly because it does inventing the, and my friend and co-author Larry Kelly is the one who pitched me the idea of this Band of Brothers style of story, where we learn all of the members of the Cantaburnium, and that's great. It also means that I have to come up with all of their backstory, and so yeah, that one is going to stop at 2 for now, not permanent, but once I get
but
a little bit.
I definitely understand this trouble of yours. Like you said, it's a very good problem to have. And I was really I really liked what you said about this writing method you had of basically writing those 7 books and then publishing them as fast as possible, one after the other. And I tried to do something quite similar. I wrote 3 books by the time the first one was published. But it's the same. Now I will need some time to catch up to plot the second arc of the story. So I mentioned it quite early. There will be 4 books, then a break on the main story, because I also want to write other things. So it's not 7 books. All right. I didn't do as much as you, but I can see the value in this. Again,
it was an accident. It was purely an accident, and it just, worked out.
Yeah, so it worked out pretty well. You added, if I remember, the very beginning of the first book afterwards, right? You wrote it afterwards.
Yeah. See, when I released the original first edition Conquest of Gaul, because to me it was the story, and basically what I sat down, I tried very hard. It's why I bought the kit of a Roman legionary and went out to Big Bend National Park in the desert and walked around like a moron, dressed in chainmail and all, and understood why Roman legionaries were so tough, because Caligulae don't have arch support, and that's just, and they didn't wear socks during and that sucked. But the idea of immersing myself in the story and being true to the story is very important. And so one of the things that when I sat down to write the story of Titus, I'm like, okay, I'm a 63-year-old guy. I just turned 64, but 63-year-old guy. And I'm looking back on my life, and I'm leaving this for my future generations. And I'm leaving this for my fellow legionaries. And I want the world to know, what we did. But since I'm also doing it for my progeny and for my posterity, am I just going to pick up where I joined the Legion? No, I'm going to say I was born, and grew up on this farm, and these were my sisters, and my dad was an asshole. And, and also as is early on, I didn't have any idea of making Titus as complex a character as he became. But again, as I'm writing and as I'm putting, and this, no matter how hard you try, you're going to put part of yourself into your characters. I mean, if you are being true to your characters, true to yourself, and if you're doing your best, part of who you are shows up in your characters, or part of who you want to be shows up in your characters, So, as I'm doing this, I'm seeing all of these parallels and stuff. I have a horrible temper. Now, I've never stabbed a baby or anything, or, done all the things that he did, but I've done things in the height of the rage that had profound consequences on my life and the life of people around me. And in his particular line of work, and the thing is, it is in his particular line of work, it's what makes him good at his job. Being a legionary, and especially in those days, look, as a sniper, I might engage a target from 1,000 meters. Those guys were
really close
away from each other. Yeah, it was a very, very personal thing. Warfare back then was very, very personal. So, if you're a happy-go-lucky, hey, live and let live, let's give peace a chance kind of guy, you're probably not going to last very long standing in the formation. I make no bones about it. From the very beginning, I talked about, and now that I have had the chance to talk to a couple of the people who were involved in the HBO series Rome, I won't say too much about that, but their research in terms of the they only showed it once, but the battle scene, the very first battle scene, and how they, these guys are standing in line and they're fighting each other, and how do they do this? And the whole system of relief and turning and moving down the ranks and everything. That made a lot of sense. And especially once I heard, how they came about the various, the research that was done for the series, which, historically, let's face it, it was not really that true to history, the historical record, but it was, to me, Rome was very authentic in terms of, their life, the daily life and what it looked like. And, of course you can't smell the TV, but, probably what it smelled like and all of the, the daily stuff that was daily life for people that period. I think they did a great job. And so, watching that, that absolutely was a foundation of how I wrote the battle scenes of, and how could these little guys that are 5'4" and maybe 110 pounds, who conquer these big meat-eating barbarians that are, 6'1", 6'2", 200 pounds, packed full of protein and muscle. That's how, they were better organized, they were better trained,
they were efficient,
and they did not think like warriors. They thought like, only the tribunes and, the guys on the cursus honorum, those were the guys who, wanted to get into single combat. The guys in the ranks, no, their goal is to live until tomorrow. They're being a member of the head count, you're not going to become famous. You're not going to have a statue. What you want to do for the most part is live to see the next day. So, of course you fight dirty, and of course it's not about giving the other guy a chance. And of course it's, killing him when he's down, or, doing whatever it takes to win.
And
so
Titus and all his comrades definitely have a talent for this, especially because of Titus. He's managing them well.
Yeah, well, and that's again. So as I thought about it, okay, what would help a guy survive, the 42 years of the conquest of Gaul and all the combat of the civil wars, and especially in the civil wars where you're fighting guys just like you. You're not fighting, some barbarian who uses a long round tip sword and is trying to decapitate you and all. And, I read it early on during, I think it was the Bernard Cornwell's Sharp series, the truism, the point beats the edge. And that you look at the Roman sword, the short stabbing sword versus the long Gallic sword with the long, the long edged blade. And, there's only one place where you can create an instant kill, and that's the neck area. Even if you got the, inside of the elbows or the thighs or everything, that's going to kill somebody, but not immediately. You disembowel somebody or, go a little bit lower, especially with men, and come up. And that was the first position, I call it the first position thrust, coming under the shield. Let's face it, every guy on the planet, no matter the age, that's going to get their attention.
Yep.
That is going to go, okay, this guy is serious, So those are the kinds of things that the Romans, being the pragmatists they were, that's what they, focused on. And so like I look at Titus and I say, well, okay, being big is going to help. I mean, it's got to help. Being bigger and stronger has got to help. Especially if you're trained not to think of as a warrior, but as a member of a unit. And so that was just kind of my thought process. And then the rage, where when he gets in these moments of
berserker mode.
Yeah, exactly. The berserker mode, which, his descendant Titus is experiencing in Anglo-Saxon England.
So among all the books that you've written, so including the Anglo-Saxons, the What Ifs, which one is your favorite? Which one did you prefer writing?
The book I prefer writing is the one I haven't written yet.
Nice.
Actually, no, it's kind of a bluff, but it's not. It's that, ironically enough, I'm a history major. I got my degree in history, and my area of focus was the American Civil War. And back when I first started this, there was not going to be a Marching with Caesar series. I was going to tell the story of Titus Pullis, and that's it. That was all I was going to do. And then I was going to move on to the era that I know the most about, and that's the American Civil War. Then as things have progressed and interest has developed and all, I developed this idea of a genealogy. And I got what is it? Picasso says, great artists or good artists copy and great artists steal, or something like that. Well, there are two authors whose work has inspired me in that sense. And one is a guy named Edward Rutherford, who he writes about locations. And I first read his book Sarum, which is basically about Stonehenge and Salisbury. And what he did was created a genealogy, and it's basically, like 5 families that are in this period, this area throughout time, all the way through the modern day. And now I'm drawing a blank on the other guy. But the point being is that I wanted the idea of a genealogy of characters from the same family, not 5 different families, but one family, but going through different eras. And going through different eras that interest me. And basically this line that, of course, they don't know, maybe towards the end, as we become better educated and better informed, they'll have some inkling that, their great grandfather was something. But for right now, there's no way for them to know, for example, that Titus, who doesn't know how he got his name, is just a family name, living in 878 in England, is the direct descendant of the Titus Pullus from Astigi, who was born in 61 BC, or 76 BC. So and so from the Berserker period, the Viking period, my next, I want to do the Crusades, and so on, and ultimately end up in the American Civil War. With a character, I've already named him. I've actually already started that book, and it's not going to be popular because and this is all the culmination of my story, and that is because the character is going to have been born in Mitchell County, North Carolina. Mitchell County is up in the area where North Carolina and Tennessee border. It's in the heart of the Smoky Mountains. He's a Scots-Irishman. He comes from a Scots-Irish family, and he is drafted into the Confederate Army. And, he's a poor mountain boy, so he doesn't have the $500 substitution fee. So he's going to fight for the South. And I know in this day and age, that's not going to make people happy, but the fact of the matter is that it's my story, number one. I mean, because again, R.W.Peake, my great grandfather, and the reason I have a great grandfather that fought in the Civil War is because he didn't have my grandfather until he was 55 years old. So that's why, I'm close enough. But anyway, he was born, and the thing is, Mitchell County tried to secede from North Carolina, because the Scots-Irish in the hills up there, they did not believe in slavery. They thought it was wrong. They, weren't successful. And as a result, and it's similar to other eras like the Vietnam era, where people who didn't necessarily support the war were still in Vietnam because they couldn't afford to, they didn't have a rich dad to talk about bone spurs, to have a doctor write about bone spurs. So, anyway, so that's ultimately, that's kind of the book that I am most looking forward to writing.
So getting to the Civil War period of Titus genealogy. Yeah.
A big, and of course, by that point, being large isn't going to be that big a thing. Is it?
Makes you a bigger target for the musket and all the rifles. Sorry.
Yeah, well, that is a whole, the idea, the thing that made the Civil War so incredibly brutal is that, there's the truism that generals are always fighting the last war. And all of the generals for both sides had been steeped in the tactics of Napoleon and Napoleonic warfare, when the musket had the average range of 50 yards. And then came the mini ball and the rifled cartridge. And all of a sudden you can have the same effect at 200 yards. And so you get these people close together and they're slaughtering each other. And they didn't have the background, the training, or the wherewithal to figure out, and it was considered unmanly to go hide behind something, no, you stood up there like men and shot at each other until, one side got shot more than the other. I mean, that's so that's, to me, those are the kinds of aspects that I'm looking forward to talking about, because it's stuff I've been studying for my whole life, actually.
And you've certainly written a lot. You said like 4 books a year. You tend to write, maybe now down to 2 or 3. So what's a regular writing day for you? How does it go?
A regular writing day is I write until I get tired of writing. I mean, it's hard. It is really difficult. This is, I get asked by, what is my process? What is this? What is this? How are you so prolific? And, you can, I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and I'm sure there are people who, aren't fans or whatever, and all, but I think nobody can argue I am prolific. One of your questions about how many books. I actually had to stop and think, and I think I'm at 34.
Yeah, I couldn't count all of them. They are not all on your website.
So there's the Sacrifice Revolt will be volume 20, and then there's 7 of the series, the alternate history series, and then there's 4 of the Titus series, and then there's 2 of the 10th. And so Sacrifice Revolt will be the 34th.
And just for everyone to remember, that's since 2008.
Yeah, pretty much 2008. Actually, since I wrote, I didn't write. I mean, I did not write much in 2011. I went through a period where, oh my God, I suck.
Imposter syndrome a bit.
Yeah, well, and just the I was reading online about how to get published and sending out query letters and all this stuff, and I got rejected like 25 times, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to Costco and putting in my job application because I clearly suck at this. And then I was watching a show with Anderson Cooper. He had a very short-lived talk show, and he had a young lady named Amanda Hocking on there who had been rejected 1,000 times and then self-published and ended up becoming one of the early indie darlings. And back when indie authors, the goal was to get a contract with a publisher. That is no longer the goal. That much I can tell you. I was fortunate enough to keep paying attention to her because she was on Anderson Cooper's show right after she had signed the contract with Bantam. It was a 5-book contract with I think it was a 6-figure advance. And everybody's, woo, that's great. And she was very happy about it and all. And so when I saw that, I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and self-publish and then try to get, somebody to get interested in picking up my books. However, I kept reading her blog. And as I read her blog, I watched the joy just being sucked out of her life on an almost daily basis with, deadlines. And for example, people don't think about it or know much about it, but the advance, that's not a payment, it's a loan. That is a loan. And if your books don't live up to what, the publisher is betting on, I've read both sides. I've read the side where the publisher has said, that's our bad, whatever, we don't want the money back. I've read more
horrifying stories.
The other side where they are like, yeah, where's that $50,000? Well, I used it to live. That's not our problem. And it's something that again, I don't want to divulge too much about some possibilities for Marching with Caesar, but once you get involved with a publisher, once you get involved with an editor, where they have that kind of power over you, there's a lot of does it have to be such and such, in your story? I think this would be better. And I'm not necessarily opposed to, people, having ideas and all. But at the same time, they want to sell books. I get that. And that's their ultimate goal. And I think there are times where you have, as an author, as a writer, maybe what you're going to, like, for example, if I'm going to write about the Civil War and write that my character's fighting for the South, that's not a marketing. My editor, if I had an editor that had that kind of power, would be good. Does he have to be for the Confederacy? Well, he was born in a cabin on Roan Mountain in North Carolina. He's
that's what would have happened. Yeah,
poor, exactly. And and it's the same kind of thing. I know damn good and well that one of the most commented things I get on my books, and it's one I put in deliberately. And the reason I put it in is I thought, okay, is everybody going to want to this book, I'm going to try to make it as real as I can, as far as what it would have been like to be a Roman legionary. And it's the dream sequence in the very beginning of Conquest of Gaul, where he stabs the baby during the massacre of the Usipeti and Tencteri. And anybody who doesn't think that a soldier of Rome, during that period, or during any period of time, the sack of Jerusalem comes to mind, where they're tossing babies and catching them on their javelins and stuff. And I put it in there knowing that there were going to be people who go, that's it, I'm done. And that's okay. That's okay. Because it's not for everybody. I wanted to be honest and accurate and try to convey to readers what it might have been like. And the fact that, and I've gotten a little bit of commentary about, well, he wouldn't have been upset about that.
So now the other side of the argument.
Really, do you know about that? I mean, especially if you're a guy with kids, and of course he had kids and they died. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, those are the kinds of things that being self-published, that at least gives you you don't have to have those conversations of, this is where I want the story to go. And somebody going, yeah, but it'll sell more if you do it this way, And again, if it makes sense, I'd say, okay, go for it. But it doesn't always make sense. But the whole, does it have to be? I've been running into that a bit with Marching with Caesar. My daughter graduated from University of Southern California from the film school. And she was in the class of 2001. And the keynote speaker was Robert Zemeckis. And I'm the guy who did Forrest Gump and, several other movies. And what I remember, and it's one of those weird things. In 2001, I had no idea that in 8 years later, I would be in a situation where, this would be something I would remember, other than just being a joke. And he was talking to these students, these graduating students who want to make a career in the film industry. Look, you've got to guard your idea. Because there are going to be people who want to take your idea and do things with it that you may not want. And so he stops and he goes, you've all heard the joke. How many studio executives does it take to change a light bulb? Does it have to be a light bulb? And
nice.
That is, and I have run into, does it have to be a light bulb moment a couple of times. One in very, again, I can't say, but one in particular. Unfortunately, the partner that I'm working with, who is a huge fan as well as being in the business, had the exact same reaction that I did when the person who unfortunately had the checkbook said, well, does it have to be this? And maybe one day I'll write about what it was. It was just, and it was one of those things that it's like, I knew then that this person and their vision was just not going to work. I mean, it's not going to work. Unfortunately, I have the power to say, sorry,
that's how
I'm
it
not
is.
interested. Yeah. And, once you sign that contract with the publisher, you don't. Plus you only get 15%, whereas Amazon pays quite a bit more. So
fair enough.
Also that. Yeah.
So you don't need to sell as much to make more. It's pretty good too.
Yeah. I mean, that was when I was approached, and I signed an NDA, so I can't say the publisher's name. It starts with a K and ends with an S. And basically what they said was, look, we can guarantee that we will quadruple your sales. And the thing is that you have to, it's a niche, ancient Rome is a niche market. Okay. It's not a huge, it goes through, there are periods of time where, because of a TV series, it becomes popular. But, by and large, it's not, it's not erotica or whatever. But I also, by that point, when they pitched me that, I was like, well, unless my name is King or Patterson, I'm getting 15% through a publisher. That's that's the industry standard. It's what it's always been until Colleen Hoover. But at the same time, I've got Amazon paying me 70% on ebooks. And I don't know about you, but ebooks is 98% of my revenue.
Huh. Well, now I think I'm not as, ebooks would be about 60-70%.
Really?
Yeah,
so that's good.
Yeah, I guess the cover is is helping.
Yeah, no, look, your cover, the book you sent me is a great cover, and that has a lot to do with it. And that's actually, I got to shout out to Marina Shapova, my original cover artist of the original Conquest of Gaul book, the very iconic picture of Titus on the cover that I will go to my grave thinking that was a lot of the key to success when people saw that cover, as they're scrolling through Amazon. But the fact of the matter is that with me, most of my revenue comes from ebooks, of which I get 70%. And I'm not great at math. I never have been, but I do know that 70% of 400 or 100,000 is more than 15% of 400,000. And that's why it was a pretty short conversation to say, thanks, but no thanks. Now, there are things that they do provide in terms of marketing and all, but you also have to be in a buzzy kind of niche for a big-time publisher to want to invest more than the bare minimum. And, writing about a Roman legionary who kills a lot of people, probably not gonna, be huge. So
now, as a reader, do you care if the book is self-published or traditionally published, or what do you tend to read recently?
That of all of the downsides of my life, that's probably the biggest one.
Not reading as much as you want.
I just don't. And I'll give you an example. Okay. So I just finished Sacravir's Revolt, which is about the revolt of Sacravir, which was in 21 AD. And I'm now going to start work immediately on what will be volume 5 of the Titus Chronicles. And this is a period of time where I have to do a lot of research, not just on Wessex and Anglo-Saxon England, but because of the story. And another thing that I don't do, and I don't outline. The story takes me where the story takes me. Okay. I mean, I will say with the first 7 books of Titus, I mean, I knew the ending in the sense, he's going to survive. He's going to die in his sleep, And I knew that there were these events in his life. There's the Gallup campaign, the Civil Wars, and all that stuff. After that, with the characters, I don't, and that's one of the reasons I'm prolific, is I want to know what's going to happen just as much as readers do. I'm sitting there going, okay, what's going to happen, with, in the Titus Chronicles, and, his woman has been kidnapped, and, and all, but now, because of what I did with the characters, I've got to do a lot of research on France, on Francia, and particularly the area, Baldwin, the ancestor of King Baldwin of Jerusalem. This is Baldwin II, Margrave of Flanders. And, so I've got a whole lot of stuff to slog through on that. And so as a result, I don't have the time. What I do in term for leisure stuff, what I'm doing is I listen to, like when I'm in the car, I listen to stuff. And for example, what I'm doing right now is I'm re-listening to Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, one of my all-time favorites. And that was who else? Edward Rutherford and Ken Follett. Because Ken Follett writes about a family, or descendants, and they're moving around. I mean, Pillars of the Earth was about the cathedral, but the point is that I'm re-listening to Pillars of the Earth, and I'm about to start World Without End, which was the sequel. That's the only stuff I do for fun is listen nowadays.
Have you tried the number 4 in this series, the evening and morning, or morning and evening?
I listened to it. And the only reason I know that is because I just saw on Audible that, number 5 of the Kingsbridge series
was going to show up.
Come out. Yeah. And I'm like, number 5? What the hell? I'm like, okay, Pillars of the Earth, World Without End, Column of Fire. And then the other one, and so then I look in my Audible library, and it shows that I've listened to it. I have no memory of it at all.
It was actually a good one.
It's either bad news for Ken Follett or bad news for me, because I'm getting old. But yeah, I mean, it shocked me. It absolutely shocked me. But so yeah, I'm going to do that. Simon Scarrow, I keep up on his, again, on Audible. Yeah. And then I did the George R.R. Martin series.
All right.
The only other guy who writes books as long as I do. And, and that guy, see, you want to talk about process, I am not one to talk about process, because again, the writing is done somewhere in my head. And it has been this way since I was a kid. I will write, and then I'll get tired of writing, and I will stop, and I will be in mid-sentence, and I will go to sleep. I will wake up, and it will pick up in the middle of the sentence, and it's already been written in my head. Now, that doesn't mean I make changes and, I go back and all that stuff. I do all that. But somewhere in the back of my head, it's like a computer working on background. It's just the story is churning in my head. And when I sit down, I just continue the story. And, I tried to count one time. I don't do this anymore. I haven't written 10,000 words in a day in a couple years, but I generally probably around 5,000, 6,000 words a day. Wow. Whereas George R.R. Martin writes 300 words a day, which is why he is now 5 years behind on the latest book that, and I got to tell you, I mean, again, I'm not one to talk about process or, criticize writers, but if that was, I'd have shot myself so long ago. If that was all I could, 300 words a day. I mean, I've seen and I've heard the arguments that there's the writers who are plotters, not plotting, but plotting. You know, the people who do the outlines and all that. And then there are pantsers. And that's what I am, and to fly by the seat of my pants. And George R. R. Martin is a plotter. He's very clear about that. And like every word that you put in your story has to argue for itself to be in the story. You know, that you have to have this internal debate about each word. And again, I could not do that. I couldn't. There's no way.
It's two very different processes. I guess on my side, I'm very much an outliner, a plotter as well. But I write a lot. I'm not arguing like he does about each word in a sentence. So a usual day for me of writing, good day of writing, would be between 3,000 and 4,000 words. But I can achieve that because of the plot being ready. I know exactly what's going to happen. So I just put down the words that are already written in my head. So it goes.
So that sounds similar to me in that sense. I have it. It's up here. Now, having said that, you know, there are also moments where, you know, I will catch myself and go, wait a minute. You know, what if, you know, I change that? And what if I didn't do this? And, you know, what if I zigged instead of zag? You know, that kind of stuff. And look, there are days that I write nothing, you know, not many of them. And I feel, you know, I do feel strange if I don't. But at the same time, you know, especially with all that I've had going on in my life, there have been days, you know, lately that I haven't had a chance to.
Same here. I call those days Saturdays and Sundays. Because of the kids. But you know, I'm still trying as much as possible.
That would help you, because I'm in a position of my life, and it's been like this since these books took off, where days of the week are meaningless to me. I mean, I couldn't, you know, okay, I know it's Sunday, but I have to stop and ask myself, what day is today? You know, I just, you know, one day is much like the other, because I don't have, you know, my baby is 43 years old, living in another country. So I don't have that kind of need for that kind of structure. It could probably be good for me, but I mean, I don't know. I just, I think whatever works for people, it's going to be different for everybody. There is no right in, you know, in terms of, or very early on in when I got started on this, I made the mistake of getting onto the Kindle direct publishing forums, message boards. They call it the Kindle community. And it's a community in the same way that the game show Survivor is a community. You know, it's basically, you have people, and it astounded me that there are people, and what I learned fairly early on was, this was back, you know, in 2012, 2013, when Amazon was adding 30,000 titles a week. And 29,950 of them were indie titles. And of that 20,950, 20,949 were pieces of crap that should have never seen the light of day. And then all of these people went onto the Kindle community, and you could tell it's the people who viewed it as a zero-sum game, where if you're successful, that means people aren't buying my book. And the lengths that some people, and it's in the back of my mind, because I keep everything. Like when I was on the message board, I archived everything, of writing a book about the insanity of what people will do. Just, you know, guys, because, you know, you get more 5-star reviews, and then people will go to your book and, you know, give you a series of 1-star reviews. And there was a cottage industry back then of, you know, people who would tell you, okay, here's what you do. You buy a bunch of Amazon gift cards, okay, and you only get them for like $5 a piece. And then you can use each gift card to create an account. And then you can use that account to slide with people you don't like. I mean, it is insane. I mean, it was insane. And the reason I ended up trademarking Marching with Caesar is because a blog, Marching with Caesar blog with my picture in a Nazi uniform, showed up online. You know, I mean, it was absolutely bizarre.
Brutal, yeah.
But yeah, it's just, you know, it was a very interesting. And the thing is that then Amazon had to crack down, and it got it to the point where you have to be very careful now. You have to be very careful. You know, I tell people, do not, you know, I tell my family, you know, none of my family members have reviewed any of my books, you know, things like that. You know, it's just, don't do it, because it's not worth what can happen, you know?
So actually, that was going to be my last questions. Do you have what advice would you give to new writers out there, especially who consider self-publishing?
Well, my number one piece of advice is make sure that people who don't give a crap about you, and even better, may not like you that much, if they tell you that what you wrote was good, then, you know, you can rely on that. Just because your mom told you you're the next Hemingway, just because your girlfriend said it's the best thing she's ever read, don't take that. You've got to find a group. And that's what helped me. I went into, you know, because I was at a really low point. And this was in late 2011, early 2012. I took a creative writing class at the local college. And instead of writing our assignments, I just handed out pieces of my book. You know, I didn't write a word. And this was a class of, you know, I think 30 or 40 kids, or I say, well, they're all kids to me, but 30 or 40 people ranging in age from, you know, college age to, you know, older, you know, 30s and 40s. And the feedback was great. I mean, the feedback was absolutely great. And it told me then, okay, I might actually have something here that somebody is going to like. So until you get that kind of feedback from people, you're not ready. Number two is develop a really thick skin. And just be prepared for people who, you know, especially if you're going to write in ways that might provoke people, like, for example, stabbing a baby, you know, just build a thick skin. And I guess number three would be, if there's anybody who ever tells you that, you know, their way is the only way to do something that you're going to be successful, you turn around and you run from those people as fast as you can. Because that's one of the reasons I got into trouble, was because I made a comment about editors. And the fact of the matter is, I did not use an editor for my first book. I did it myself. Now, I also will tell you, you know what? And that's number 4. Don't do it yourself. Okay. I just happen to be a grammar savant. I don't know how. I could not diagram a sentence to say I failed the grammar portion of English all through school. But I just look at a sentence and I know it's constructed well. Now, I will say that I've gotten a lot better since I've had an editor. And I did go back and have that book edited, but I got away with it. I had, you know, it sold, you know, a few thousand copies, and I had, you know, 50 5-star reviews, and nothing well than the 1-star review from the person who heard when I said I didn't use an editor. And then immediately within 30 minutes after I doing that, I had a 1-star review saying this is the worst editor, you know. But you know, those are the kinds of things that that are just part and parcel of it. And it's a good problem to have because it means that people are reading your stuff. But yeah, find the money to have somebody edit it professionally. That would be my fourth piece of advice. But yeah, but the third piece is, again, there are different ways to be successful. There's not, there are some common things. Again, making sure that it's not just your mom and people who care about you tell you that your writing's good. That would probably be number one.
That's a very, very good advice. And I think personally, this is something I was really lucky because I write in English, so my family cannot read it. So
there you go. There you go.
So no one in my family, problem solved. And my wife hasn't read the series that I'm publishing. She's read a bunch of my books before, but not the published ones. So all the people who commented on it are people who originally didn't give a damn about me, and it feels really good when a stranger tells you that they've loved.
It does. Look, it is awesome. It's again, it's a good problem to have when people are saying, when's your next book coming out? It's always wonderful to hear. And it's funny because you talk about your wife not reading your books. My daughter has not read one of my books. And she will never read one of my books. And it's because she's like, I hear your voice when I'm reading it. I hear your voice talking about, eyeballs popping out and, and stabbing babies and all that. And that's just gross and it's disgusting. So,
I understand. I can imagine why that would be difficult for her specifically. So, but you see, look, I wrote a series of books on her culture. She hasn't read it yet, right? It feels, she will. I'm sure she's listening to me right now. So as soon as I open that door, I'm in trouble.
Well, that's I can see that might be a problem. I don't have that problem. I don't have anybody look at my show.
But like you said, good reviews from people who don't need to give you good reviews feels very good, and thick skin against bad reviews is also very important. I just received. Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I just received my first 1-star review rating review this week. So now that's it. I'm a writer officially. I don't mind so much, to be honest. I think people who leave 1-star review, just the book wasn't for them. I mind more about a 3-star review because that's someone who wanted to like the book and for some reason didn't.
Right.
Yeah. So 1-star,
I got to tell you,
fine.
One thing that has changed with the system, because it used to be that you couldn't just leave a rating. You had to write a review, and that bothers me. Even though that all, you got so many 5 stars and all that, but it's like, okay, but what did you like about it? And there are times that there are, I want to say good 1-star reviews to have. The one that I will always remember, and that always, there are 2, but the one where, not to spoil anything, but when Titus the younger, Titus's grandson dies, and I got a 1-star review, and all it read was, "You bastard," you killed Titus, and the thing is, I had thought long and hard about it because I'm like, it's just all of these guys living long lives in their line of work it's just not going to work, and then the other one was when the first Titus Chronicles came out, and it was from an Italian reader who was just livid that I had made Titus's descendant English and not Italian, and he called me, I've got a good friend, Julia Chapman, who's a guide in Rome, who because he's called me, hijo de, something in Italian in the review. And I sent it to her and she was like, yeah, you don't want to know what that means. You really don't. it's not good. So every once in a while
it's out of love. That's someone who really wants to.
I mean,
look,
he was invested enough. Exactly. He was invested enough that, I hurt his feelings.
Yeah.
So that's good.
But that's good. Hurting feelings is also a good sign as a writer, I believe.
Exactly. It means people are invested. So
yeah, absolutely. Again, I don't have as many reviews as you, obviously. But there was one recently that gave me a very funny 4 stars. He said, like, the book was amazing, but why did you make this character so bad? Because the story is quite famous. It's quite a famous story with characters that you see in video games and everything. And yeah, I transformed a very popular character into an asshole, and I think this reader didn't like it. Many readers didn't like it, which is why I chose to make this guy like this. I heard their feeling a little bit, and yeah, it feels good to see some reactions to it. I'll take that 4 stars.
I had a guy, and I don't badmouth other authors. I will just say that Connor Golden.
We had this conversation before.
And I got into a very long, and it's one of those things where I'm sitting here because it's all, by direct message. And there's part of me going, why are you going back and forth with this guy? It's like a 19-year-old kid who's arguing with me about how, yes, Mark Antony and Octavian was a street urchin, and Caesar and Brutus and Mark Antony did grow up. They were all children together. They grew up together and ran the streets of Rome together. And I'm like, that everybody thought Caesar was Brutus's dad, right? I mean, no, and I was just, it was astounding. And that's the one part that, it's kind of my crusade, is that try to be historically accurate. And look, there are times that I fudge with the history. I always put in my historical notes, and the Sacrevere's Revolt, I'm going to be doing that, just not much, but a little bit. And I'm going to point it out going, look, this is, not necessarily what the historical record says, but anyway, but yeah, I mean,
there is a lot to say about Connie Goulden's Conqueror series. It's a brilliant series, just not the most historically accurate.
I mean, look, again, I was saying earlier, there are authors who are writers, and there are authors who are storytellers and all. He's a good writer. I'm not going to take anything away with his writing. Taking history out in the back and shooting it in the head and then burying it. As a history major, I have a little bit of a problem with that.
Yeah,
and not even the fact that he said anything beforehand. If he had said, in a foreword going, look, I'm going to get crazy here, that'd have been one thing, but no. And now this 19-year-old Jonathan Zago is running around arguing with me about how, no, it's true, and I'm like, no.
Yeah, there is a responsibility to being a historical fiction writer. I think, needs to be taken seriously so that people don't go around with those
one of the
theories.
Questions you asked, and I'll be real brief, about historical fiction and the direction. I went to the Historical Novel Society convention 5 years ago, and I was really looking forward to it because I had a guy at the Historical Novel Society who reviewed the first four books, and they were great reviews, and it was awesome. But a couple things happened. And what I realized when I went to that convention, I was one of the audience of authors was less than 10% male. I mean, less than 10% male. And what I realized is what historical fiction is, as far as the publishing industry is concerned, is it's romance novels set in a time period. I mean, that's all it is. And the other thing is I sat in these breakout sessions, and especially about Rome and these, and I'm not going to name the authors, but they had these authors on the panel, and I'm looking them up, and I'm like, I sell way more books than all of these people, but what I realized then is the Historical Novel Society is underwritten by publishing companies. And so back in 2000, that was 2014, they were not down with, even acknowledging that indies existed or anything like that. But if there could be a delineation of historical fiction, where and the way I think the way I put it is this, is that kind of historical fiction is character driven story in a historical setting where the historical stuff is like background. My type of historical fiction, your type of historical fiction it's the historical events that are driving the story, not the other way around. It's not just an excuse to dress the characters up in togas and stola and having them, go to the orgies and stuff. It's the events and everything. And that's something that but historical fiction is also the largest genre out there, because women are the biggest readers. So, what are you going to do?
What you said reminds me, the other day there was maybe in a podcast that I followed called Rock, Paper, Swords by the historical fiction writers Matthew Harvey and Stephen M. McKay. And I forgot if that was in a podcast, but one of them mentioned that sometimes you read historical fiction and you realize this story could happen anywhere. They just put the characters on a horse instead of a bike.
Right.
And that's not,
historical fiction.
It's not historical fiction. If you can put the same story happening no matter where, no matter when, it's not historical fiction. You just put your characters in a different setting. Right. So I think it goes with what you just said. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. That was one of the reasons it was one of the times I had to fly to Florida, and it was eye-opening. I mean, it was valuable in the sense that I learned a bunch of lessons. I hired a publicist and I spent $5,000 on her telling me, okay, you need to get a website, a Twitter account, and a Facebook page. $5,000, please. That was an expensive learning lesson. I'm thinking, oh, you're going to set up, interviews and things like that. No. So, yeah. So anyway.
All right. So very, very last question. When is your next book coming out?
I am shooting for a release date around our Memorial Day, the end of May.
Okay.
Sacrevere's Volume 20, Sacrevere's Revolt. And here's a heads up that you can call a scoop if you want.
Nice.
This is not going to be the last of the Gnaeus Volusianus Pullus story, but it's coming to an end. And I'm going to be taking, because I realized I got into this thing where I am doing it generation by generation, and I want to get to the invasion of Britannia and the sacking of Jerusalem. Those are the two drop dead things that have been goals of mine. And at this rate, that will be in 2073 if I keep continuing doing
so
each
there might
generation.
Be a gap.
There's going to be a gap. I'm just telling you. And so and probably there's going to be a few you bastard reviews involved. But I just realized, I'm like, man, I'm in 21 AD. I've got another 20 some odd years to go, and yeah, so I gotta make some decisions. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the scoop.
All right. Thanks.
And thank you very much for joining me today again. I kept you a very long time. Sorry for that. That was a very pleasant conversation.
I enjoyed it.
Same. All right. Thank you very much, Ron, and see you very soon.
All right.
Bye.
Okay. Talk to you later. Bye-bye. Bye.